web interview series, Meeting the Left, this time with Clémentine Autain from France. First, a technical remark: we will conduct the interview in French and in English with simultaneous interpretation. So please make your language selection. For this, you must click on the planet icon at the bottom of your screen, select either English or French, and make sure that you have the original audio muted. My name is Walter Baier. I'm an economist based in Vienna. I'm the political coordinator of the Transform network. Together with my friend Tatiana Moutinho, who represents Cultra, which is the Portuguese member organization of Transform, I will moderate this interview with Clémentine. Transform Europe is a network of 34 organizations and journals from 22 European countries, which are active in the field of critical research and political education. And simultaneously, the network is associated as a think tank to the party of the European left. Let me now introduce Clémentine Autain. She is publishing director of the magazine Regards. She was co-secretary of la Fondation Copernic, an organization which also belongs to the Transform network. She's a member of Ensemble, which is a political organization founded in 2013 and took part in le Front de Gauche. In 2017, Clémentine was elected to the French National Assembly on the slate of la France Insoumise. And today, she's also well known to the public as one of the founders and key persons of the Big Bang initiative, of which we will speak later on. Clémentine, very nice having you here this afternoon. After a first part in which Clémentine will be interviewed by Tatiana and me, there will be a second part in which the audience is invited to ask questions. We will provide you with the necessary technical instructions on this later. And without any further ado, I pass now the floor to Tatiana for the first question. Please, Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Walter, and hello, Clémentine. Walter has already referred to the Big Bang initiative that was launched by you and other political figures from the French left. Could you explain a bit more about what that Big Bang initiative is? What are its objectives? What are, has it made progress, and what are the next steps? Well, good evening to all of you. First, I'd like to say that I'm very happy to be able to talk with activists and people who are committed to European politics ahead, climate change and an economic crisis, of course, the wake of the COVID pandemic. So that is why we need actions that go beyond national borders, which is why I'm so happy to be here discussing all of this with you. The Big Bang Initiative was launched very soon after the European elections. It was a call to action. We wanted to sound the alarm because the results from the elections were very bad for the left in particular. The left seemed very fragmented, and we thought it was very important to say something and speak with a strong voice. And we wanted to alert not only political activists, but also private citizens. Private citizens duel between the far right and the central right. They want something unprecedented, fitting the 21st century. And from that basis, we think that this project, which is worthy of the 21st century, has to combine a strong social component as well as a strong green component. And we think that the left has to come up with a strong response for the 21st century. You know, there's this slogan, end of the month, end of the world. So social justice is very important, as well as the climate challenge. So we've brought together key figures coming from very different political horizons. I'm a member of parliament in France representing La France Insoumise, and La France Insoumise was a part of this initiative together with the communist members of parliament, but also the initiative launched by Benoît Hamon, and also within Europe Ecologie Les Verts, that more left-wing stream within the Green Party. But we want it to be even broader than that. We want, and that is why we have also intellectual figures and other people who've joined the initiative. And that resonated, and in particular that event, that convention that we organized actually made a strong impression. We wanted to make it clear that we wanted to get people together and rally people around the same left-wing project, but at the same time to be able to change people's lives and not only come up with yet another proposal with beautiful words. We wanted to reinvent social democracy. Social democracy has failed in the past. We need to reinvent something new. And I think that event that we organized crystallized a strong desire to bring down the wall, the barrier between people, citizens, the voluntary sector, labor unions, and politicians, and also the walls that can exist between different political parties. So that was the rationale behind the Big Bang. So how far have we come 1 year down the line? Well, first we've learned to get to know each other better. We come from different political parties, so it's you know, a core group that has got to know one another better, and we're currently working on a manifesto and on concrete practical initiatives. We have taken a number of concrete initiatives during the COVID-19 crisis and during lockdown, so it's not directly included within the Big Bang, but it derives from it. So events against coronavirus, and that was an event that, but also women during the crisis. A lot of women that were on the front line, and despite that, they were invisible. You didn't get to see them on TV, and they were also invisible because they have jobs that are underpaid and underestimated. So we organized that event and that initiative. It was a political initiative that ties in nicely with what we intend to do politically. So our ambition is not only to capitalize on what we've built, but also to take other initiatives. There's the manifesto we're working on and other initiatives that can help us really play a role in the political arena.
Thank you very much, Clémentine. You mentioned not reinventing social democracy, and that is, as usual, of a particular interest in a debate about creating a unity of the left. Particular the PS, the Socialist Party of France, suffered severe setbacks during the last decade. And I wonder, what is the attitude of the two parties, namely the PS and the Greens, in the actual political situation in France?
Well, it's hard to predict exactly, because we can see that there are different temptations throughout the Socialist Party and Europe Ecology and Green Party. They have different histories. You have on the one hand the Socialist Party that has ruled for a long time, has existed for a very long time, and on the other hand you have EELV, which is quite a recent political party and has a very positive image. So you can't compare both parties. But what is clear is that there are strong political choices in both of these parties, between those who believe that it is possible to reinvent the Socialist Party, but without a real aggiornamento. There are people in the Socialist Party who believe that, but there are others who think that we should turn a new page, turn a new leaf, and draw the lessons from the past. So it's difficult to know how many think like that, but there is a part of people in the Socialist Party who think that they should really have a proper aggiornamento. And in EELV, the Green Party, it's the same. You have different trends. There are people who believe that only ecology matters, and they don't really advocate for alliances with the left. And others think the opposite. They think that EELV, the Green Party, should take part in alliances and in reinventing a new left to fight neoliberalism. Those are very distinct and different projects. And I can see that some people are hesitating. But these things are not set in stone, you know, and I think we would be wrong in the radical left moving in these two more centrally positioned parties, which are not in the radical left of us. But this is what's interesting in the current period, but nobody could predict. Strongly tempted to believe that invent itself around the Socialist Party. So it's about fighting the trap, the Macron-Le Pen trap. But how far do we want to go? Where do we draw the line? Because it's not only about egos or politics. Those are very strong, serious issues. So is it possible to get together? And if yes, if so, on which political basis? Do we want to base ourselves on a real project, a real platform? Even if it means breaking strongly from the rationale of profit, technocracy, and neoliberalism, and all the breaks, all the hindrances. Give you another example. We fight currently against police abuse and also the flouting of human rights. So yes, it is a current and ongoing political fight. Some people on our left believe that there's nothing we can do with the Greens or with the Socialist Party, and that we shouldn't even talk with them. And others think that if we bring our identity in that dialogue, but some of us think this dialogue is useful and important so as to federate. That's not going to be easy. But that's not only true of France, but one of our main challenges is that influence in society, and their influence is too weak, even though they are within the framework and they help organize the political field. So the difficulty is also because of that. How can we speak with one voice to the country? It's not only about striking agreements within the different political apparatuses, but it's about creating a new dynamics, a new political dynamics in the country, and succeed in joining forces, even though these forces currently are looking at each other with a little bit of distrust. But if we want to set up a left that is really worthy of being called the left, but of course, you know, we can't tackle everything straight away. Austerity, the European Central Bank that has made contradictory decisions without any political advice. All of this is not working. So we have to fight against lobbies, against the power of finance, and we have also to address the climate crisis. It's all part of the same parcel. To improve our lives, we need to tackle these challenges, and we need to show strong political will, because otherwise, if we don't show that political will, we would only make small, you know, adjustments here and there. We're not talking about issues that are going to come up in the next 30 or 40 years. We're talking about issues that are burning and topical now. And COVID-19 has revealed how a health crisis was also one of these challenges, and how much we needed to cooperate. So are we going to capitalize on that crisis, on the opportunity to stop having this short-term vision and start cooperating? Or are we going to wait till there's another 1, 2, 3 health crisis? As I was saying before, if we decide to fight consumerism and profit, if we do that together, we have every weapon in our hands to help improve the lives of the majority. And I think it's all part of the same parcel, but the condition is to stop looking at counting things, but looking at what really counts, what really matters. And it's about being real actors, real co-producers, you know, not being content with what Margaret Thatcher used to say, there is no alternative. There is an alternative. We can strong political will. And I think there's the same search for political alternatives in the US or in other countries. And I think this should be an international movement that would promote that project that brings together the best of the left and ecology. Thank you very much, Clémentine. I have a question that actually picks up on Walter's question. I'm thinking of the opinion piece that you published, a convention for trees from the Greens, from the Communist Party, from the Socialist Party, and that was published in different media. Your name was not amongst the signatories. Can you explain why? Or tell us, what is this opinion piece? It's a call for action to bring together a part of the left? Well, yes, I mean, you said it all, a part of the left, yes. That includes La France Insoumise as well, but La France Insoumise is not amongst the signatories. So there is part of the left that is not part of that movement yet. So that is why I didn't sign it, because to me, it is not totally compatible with what we advocate for. Some of the people who signed that opinion piece, that call for action, also signed the Big Bang Initiative. We have to start acting straight away, can't wait. So I decided not to sign that text because I didn't think it was satisfactory, really in depth. Fighting productivism. There are a number of concrete proposals that are not negligible, but the phrasing, the words, the wording of our radical left is quite different from the wording of that piece, which is why we did not recognize, we could not identify with that piece. And that is why I wasn't at ease with the idea of signing that opinion piece, because it didn't really match where I want to draw the line. But I wasn't as violent as some of my colleagues who thought and who really had a very damning verdict on that opinion piece. I took a different stance, but what I think is that when you look into the details, some things have made progress in terms of proposals. Let me give you an example. There's the end of the signature of free trade agreements. There's also something about the pharmaceutical industry. I'm not going to draw the list of everything, but when you add them up, it's not negligible. But I think if we do not agree totally on how clean a break we want, on the wording, because we have to make sure that the words match the discontent of people in France, because that discontent is growing. It's not only about the Yellow Vests movement, and it's going to be made worse by unemployment because of the COVID-19. There are people who can't make ends meet. There are more and more people going to food banks. So we have to do things differently, and we have to be very clear about how different we want to do things. A transformation project that doesn't start with a new republic, for me, that is to say, completely questioning and reshuffling, reinventing our political regime and our republic would mean that we are not really being serious. So, having said that, in that opinion piece, there's quite a lot of interesting elements. And well, you said that it was published in many media. That was in France only, so we have to also not get ahead of ourselves. But it was a good thing because it helped us reflect on the strategic challenges. Because if you don't start tackling those challenges, then you leave a free road for everybody else, for our opponents. I want to win, but I want to win to do something, to change people's lives. So I'm not at all okay with limiting ourselves with the lowest common denominator. That is not what I'm interested in. That is not my ambition.
Our audience outside France certainly is interested to learn about the social movement. You had these tremendous social movements the past years, the Yellow Vests, and then the amazing struggle against Macron's pension reforms. And in many countries of Europe, COVID-19 to a certain extent has frozen public and political life. So I wonder, what's the state of this movement nowadays? And more generally, in which way do you think has COVID-19 affected the social and political landscape in your country?
So the current status of social movements, that's very hard to tell because we were all in lockdown, you know. But yesterday there was a demonstration organized against racism and police abuse against that young 14-year-old Adama Traoré that was violently assaulted by the police a few years ago. I actually come from a deprived area in the French suburbs, so I can relate to that. And I certainly remember how the Yellow Vest movement, during the Yellow Vest movement, we had all these images non-stop on TV, and a government that did nothing but reassert its support to the police. And we are not out of lockdown yet, but even though we're still in lockdown, many young people, not only young people, but many people came to protest yesterday. And on the 16th of June, there'll be a demonstration of the healthcare sector. And that is going to be very important for us to take the pulse, to feel the pulse of French society. Because, you know, every day at 8 p.m. we had a Clap the Carer movement initiative. But we have to now fight so that the government really improves the situation of healthcare professionals. It's hard to know, even though this is a very strong movement, how far it is going to go. But I think as soon as September comes, there will be important popular movements. So will there be a convergence between the Yellow Vest movement, the opposition to the pension reform, and other social issues such as the healthcare sector? It's hard to know, but I certainly hope so. And other element that I'd like to underline is that 17 NGOs have started to work. That includes the French trade union CGT, but also ATTAC, an anti-globalization organization that has put forward 34 robust proposals, and it's entitled its project Never Again. And it brings together Greenpeace, ATTAC, and trade unions such as the CGT, and they've put forward their proposals to left-wing parties. And we saw all chiefs of left-wing political parties, not around the same table, mind you, but on a video call. So there is work in progress to try and commit to finding a solution to get out of that quagmire we are with the Macron government. So that's the current status. Has COVID-19 changed things? That's hard for me to say. During the health crisis, I had the feeling that there was a certain seriousness, a certain gravitas that meant that people talked more than before the health crisis, because people realized that something really serious was happening. People also became aware of what had made us weaker facing the health crisis. And all those neoliberal standards had actually hampered us, had been obstacles. But there's also a lot of thought being given to what do we want to start again. But I can't say that there's been a major intellectual debate. There's been rather a convergence to say something simple. We can't do things as we did them before. So what do we want to start again, same as before? What shouldn't we start same as before? What it is do we do need, and what is it that we don't need? That forged new bonds, and that helped us move forward in that project to think outside the box, think something different from before. And that's also part of reinventing that 21st century. But is that to say that the health crisis will have completely shaken up the political landscape? I can't say. Will not old habits come again with a vengeance? Well, I don't know. But what will shake things up if there's a very strong social mobilization that will oblige us in both sense of the word, will compel us to act, but also oblige us in that we'll have to act. Thank you very much. Well, you've partially answered my following question, so I'll rephrase it. You said that you're not sure, you don't exactly know what's going to happen after the pandemics. Will we be able to turn the tide on austerity and neoliberalism? I think that is probably true pretty much everywhere in Europe. So my question would be, do you think that it would be possible to bring together different trends on the left to make that turning of the tide stronger? And how can we ensure that? That's a very good question. Well, I think the health crisis has shaken up things when it comes to the European Union. I think the inaptitude, the absurdity of the European Union has appeared pretty clear to people. That wasn't the first time. Been a lot of dysfunction, but I think the COVID-19 crisis has made it even more blatant. We saw Chinese people fly into France without any sort of protection, and we thought, well, what's that about? It's absurd. And our governments and the European Union has proven completely incapable of acting because national selfishness. We saw that it simply does not work. And even Europhiles, you know, on the left, actually also became aware of that. Raphael Glucksmann, who was the candidate at the Socialist Party for the European election, started saying things. I think he's not the only one. That was a symptom. So we were faced with something that helped us gain ground. Thanks to that crisis, that European Union simply does not work. But the criticism of European Union has to be combined not with sort of withdrawing in our own national identities. Certainly not. To the contrary. Because some said, well, globalization is a disaster. The European Union is completely incapable. So let's be protectionists and let's put France first. And I say to these people, be careful. That is a delusion. We have to build bridges and we have to face things together. That seems so obvious. So within the European Union, there might be subgroups that can work better. The way things are going to evolve in Italy, in Spain, and France might help us converge in the south of Europe. for example. And so that would help some countries act together. Of course, I do not have any crystal ball, so I'm not trying to predict, but I think we have to think at a supranational level. The European scale is relevant, but I'm saying that within the European Union, there might be subgroups that might work better when there is a power struggle on some issues. So we have to work together with these countries to converge, and we're certainly striving to do that. But I think we have to also think at an international scale, and I think at an international scale would really fuel the European Union, because we would then be part of something that makes sense faced with the pandemics. When you're faced with the pandemics, you soon realize that the solution cannot be national or even European. On the climate crisis, you certainly can't solve climate change single-handed in your own country or even in Europe. So there's a need for international convergence. And of course, that's not even to say that it'd be true for a fight against capitalism. But I think a new international has to be joining of forces on the political front, but also on the social front, which has happened in the past. But we are faced with the political question again currently. So, which is why I'm reflecting on the political question and to the limitations of what we can do within national borders, which is why I think a new international movement has to be built.
Yes, you rightly were referring to the failure of the European Union in addressing the COVID-19 crisis. We are now actually on the verge of a global recession. Most likely that will be the case. And I wonder what you expect as a French politician, as a European answer to this looming recession, which coincides with the huge problems which are connected with the climate crisis, and even with the necessity of adjusting our societies to digitalization, which definitely will change not only our economies, but also our styles of living. What could an internationalist and at the same time European answer be to these big events, to these big trends? Sorry.
There's no European response that has changed anything so far. There hasn't been anything worth mentioning, nothing at all. Support schemes that have been granted are yet in the same mold as before. It's the same solutions as before, and it's the same for French politicians currently. They are still thinking within the same box. You know, they think that the challenges are competitiveness, investment of capitals. We should make sure that capitals do not flee from France. They still think that poor people, well, they should get to work. You know, it's the same frame of mind as before. So I do not expect anything from the European Union when it comes to getting us out of that situation. Macron said nothing will be as before. That's a joke, because a few days afterwards he had a budget bill passed that is exactly the same as before. The reform of the ISF, you know, the wealth tax, so in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, when we had a need for a different budget, we asked that this wealth tax be rethought. But they said, no, can't do, that's impossible. So do you see how big a step they need to take? They gave 20 billion euros to big corporations without any counterpart from a social or environmental perspective. When you listen to the economics minister in France, it's always about recovery, giving a boost to wealth. The MEDEF, the Employers Federation, they have the same kind of discourse, and the Montaigne Institute, which is an important think tank, made a number of proposals on tax exemption of overtime and on a new sharing of wealth. So, and that's completely different from our line. I think they're completely incapable of thinking things differently, of thinking outside the box. So, so maybe they will rethink austerity, maybe they will rethink pension reform, because hundreds of hours have been spent at the National Assembly talking about that pension reform. So I think if COVID-19 crisis actually got the better of that pension reform and it's dead and buried, that's good. But we have other reforms or projects on which we need them to backtrack. But I'm not sure we can do it, because that neoliberal shock that actually takes advantage of crisis to go one step further and have more austerity. We cannot exclude that this might be what Macron will do and what the European Union is going to do. At a European scale, there are also other issues. Tensions will become fiercer between countries, and a certain selfishness is going to come to an end. And Germany is a case in point, breaking with that selfishness. So that's also something that we'll have to reflect post-crisis. Thank you very much, Clémentine. I had another question for you, but it's already 6:43. So I will give the floor to Walter if he has further questions, or we can start the Q&A session.
Yeah, I would propose that we start the Q&A session so that the audience also has the opportunity to ask questions to Clémentine. Is that okay with you?
Yes. Well, thank you very much for your clear and enlightening responses. So for those of you who haven't posted their questions, you have a Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen where you can post your questions, and my colleagues Giuseppe and Angelina will read a few questions. Unfortunately, this webinar will have to be wrapped up at 7:15, so our apologies in advance for those of you whose questions will not be asked. We thank you for your understanding. So Giuseppe or Angelina, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Clémentine, for your answers, and thank you to Walter and Tatiana. Since we have only questions in English, I will read out them in English, of course. I will start with the first question, which concerns the mobilization against police violence. The question is there also in France a mobilization against police violence, and is it growing with now with the mobilization in the USA?
Yes, I mentioned it at length a bit earlier. There was a big demonstration in front of the tribunal, the Court of Law in Paris, tackling issues linked to police violence and to racism. So I would say that there are common items, common elements with the US, but it is very different and on a different scale. But we are still under lockdown, and despite the lockdown, people took to the street, and that goes to show that it is important to them. And there were not only white people demonstrating, they represented all of France. So I don't know where it's going, but something's happening, that's for sure. And that's a good thing. Because impunity and the reaction of the government, of the US government, is totally unacceptable. And that has gone on for too long. So that wake-up call is extremely good.
Okay, so I'm reading the second question, which is it possible, and not only a wishful thinking, that the electoral system in France should change? It has nothing to do even with a representative democracy when all deputies and the president are getting elected by majority. Does La France Insoumise support a major reform on this?
So what I mentioned was the institutional system. I did not mean the electoral system. So I guess that's what you mean. I think we need to get rid of the Fifth Republic. The Fifth Republic revolves around the president. The president has way too many powers, and the executive power is greater than legislative power. The lower chamber, National Assembly, and we have the Senate, the higher chamber, and that begs a lot of questions because representation of the people at the Senate seems obsolete. So I cannot give you all the keys of how we want to reorganize this, how we should reorganize all of this. But we want to see the dawn of a new republic, to have a better balance of powers, and how do we reorganize things? We think it has to come from a long constitutional process. It's not about coming up with a ready-made solution, but we want to associate private citizens to this long work on what kind of regime we want to see in the future. I just want to add one thing. The problem for us is institutional, is about the balance of powers, but it goes a lot deeper, because it's about the democracy we wish for, it's about the republic we wish for, and it's about sharing of wealth for people who work and who help with our production. There's the power of the media as well, and in particular the top players in the media industry. It is also a democratic question. So you see that it's a huge project. It's not only about, okay, how do we want to elect members of parliament? It is important, but it's not only that. It's about reinventing democracy, what democracy we need and want.
Okay, Then there is a very interesting question on the extreme right. Is the extreme right, and in particular the Rassemblement National, gaining momentum on the basis of growing nationalism in the pandemic?
I'm afraid I don't have a ready-made answer for that one either. It's very difficult to gauge, to measure how much ground they are gaining. And it partly depends on us as well. Are we going to prove able to set the tone? We've done everything we could during the crisis, but with all the social debates and mobilization that is coming in the short future. And let me give you an example. In 2005, on the Treaty on the European Constitution, that was clearly something that was entrenched in a right-wing rationale. And there was a strong mobilization that clearly was fueled by the left. So what can I say? The extreme right is very strong currently. The extreme right can win elections, which is not yet true of our political movement. And in more deprived neighborhoods, Macron is strongly rejected, and they think the extreme right is the only way to get rid of Macron. And in the extreme right movement, they will try to instrumentalize that. So we have to prove more efficient. We have to be an alternative to Macron, but we have to be more than an alternative to Macron. So I can't tell you, as of today, if the lessons we are going to learn from the crisis will be for some that we need to withdraw within our own identity or our own country or nationalism, or if people will see clearly that the way forward is cooperation and sharing. Those are values and worlds that are completely different, and visions of transformation that are completely different. And from our own personal experience of the crisis, of the lockdown, which we've experienced very differently, because there were strong inequalities depending where geographically you lived or what your economic or financial situation was. But despite that, there are things we have in common in our experience of the lockdown. So I think the die is not cast yet. There's still things we can do. We have to show the way. We have to put forward solutions. And I don't think the extreme right and Marine Le Pen in particular was particularly impressive and brilliant during the crisis, but it's not over yet.
Okay, we have still a question on the election, let's say. Probably this is a point that we already stressed during the interview, but it could be good to highlight, let's say, other points. The question is a coalition between left-wing and green parties possible in the next French election, so as to demonstrate a clear and competitive alternative to both Le Pen and Macron?
Well, you know that the next elections are the second round of local elections, municipal elections, and things are not looking good. It's the second round that is looking very weird, a lot of fragmentation, divisions that I find really daunting. Let me give you an example. There's a city in Normandy called Le Havre, and our prime minister is a candidate there. And faced with Edouard Philippe, we have a candidate that came first and that could have won potentially in the second round against the prime minister. But in between the two rounds, even though he fought really hard, he couldn't strike an agreement with the rest of the left. I find that completely, disastrous. You're faced with the prime minister. You need to gather all the strength you can. So it is going to be really hard to beat the prime minister. And if you look at the whole political landscape of that second round of municipal elections, you can't say that there's a strong trend towards coalitions and getting together. There are some examples of different parties, different candidates getting together and fighting for a transformation. Then we have regional elections coming up. That is going to be really complicated as well, because and bear in mind that the regional elections will come just a year before the next presidential elections. That will be seen as a sort of stepping stone for the presidential elections. My belief is that the political landscape has not been stabilized. It's not set in stone on the left yet, which is good, because it means that we're still thinking, we're still trying to make things happen. So nobody can say today what's going to happen. My belief, let me say that again, is that the only thing that could compel us to face up to our responsibilities if there is a strong social movement in the months to come that is going to really push for us to move beyond a number of divisions. It's true that sometimes what divides us are egos, different political styles, and a lot of the candidates for the presidential elections are men. You know, apart from Ségolène Royal, we've never had a lady candidate for the presidential election. And of course, there's also the difficulty of having so many candidates that it's difficult to bring different movements together and strike alliances. But we see in the opinion polls and the surveys that French people want these alliances, they want those coalitions. But of course, we have to prove that it can work, and that it can work on the basis of true transformation. Because if we want to have coalitions and alliances to do just exactly the same as what politicians have done in the past, you have to be aware that the mere word, the left, rallies a lot of people around, but not in a good way. What I mean by that is that when you say left, people think of François Hollande and his term, and people are not convinced and they feel lost. You know, what do they mean by left? What does it mean? I'm not in favor of bandying about that word, the left. But having said that, I'm part of that tradition, and I want to flesh it out. I want to give it more life, new life.
Okay, thank you, Clémentine. I will read out the last question of the Q&A, since we have to stop our conversation at 19:15. So the question is this one. Did COVID-19 change gender roles and division of work between genders? Also, gender-based violence, did it grow?
Well, First, what was quite obvious and quite visible is that carers and healthcare workers that play such an important part, well, that's a majority of women, nurses, nurse auxiliaries, carers, cashiers, carers in care homes. They were everywhere. And despite that, they are underpaid and underestimated. So I hope that we are going to realize at long last that there's a problem here. Then in households, which is of course not as visible, the question of domestic violence was brought to the fore thanks to mobilizations in the past. Of course, there was the Me Too movement, but there were other mobilizations before the Me Too movement, and there were very big demonstrations in France. And I had, you know, I've been a feminist for a very long time. I had never seen such big demonstrations. So I think that shed some light on what's happening in households in terms of domestic violence. And unfortunately, because of the lockdown, domestic violence has gone out of proportion. That has grown. We asked for 1 billion euros to fight domestic violence, and we did not get what we asked for. We are way below Spain. Spain, even though Spain had come up with a beautiful plan to fight domestic violence, but because of the austerity plans, they had to actually downsize it. But even after downsizing their plan against domestic violence, they're still doing way more than we are. And I think what also became visible, and I think that was quite striking, that during the crisis, the very martial stance that our president said, you know, we're at war, we're at war, that very belligerent stance. And, well, what did we see on TV? Only men. Look, all the experts were men, even more so than usual. You switched on your TV set, and what did you see? Only men. Comments on political decisions, and even at the National Assembly, when we discussed easing lockdown descriptions, there were only men, even though there are 40% women amongst members of parliament. And I think that was quite visible, even though not visible enough. So I think, so what became very visible is how useful women are, but how underrepresented they are in the political arena. I think both were made more visible.
Yes, thank you very much for this answer, Clémentine. I think we approach now the end of this conversation. I would really say thank you very much for your patience and your availability. And again, it was a real fascinating event in meeting an important personality of the left in Europe. I extend my thanks also to my colleague Tatiana, who was co-moderating with me. I would like to thank Cecile Hirsch, our interpreter, who made this conversation possible, and she did it on an excellent and a high standard. I benefited much from it since I was in the English channel. So thank you very much, Cecile. And then, of course, Angelina Gianopoulos, who sits in Athens and manages the whole series, and Giuseppe Cugnatta, who at the moment sits in Sicily and did collect and present the questions. As usual, we broadcasted and recorded the event, so you can find it on our website, where also the previous recordings can be found. It remains to me to say that the 7th edition of our series Meeting the Left will be with Enrique Santiago, who is member of the Spanish Parliament on the list of Unidas Podemos, and he's also Secretary General of the Communist Party of Spain. That will be broadcasted on Wednesday, 10th of June at 6 p.m. and you can already register with the link shown in the chat or on the Transform website. This is all from my part. We have the tradition that the last word remains to our guest. So Clémentine, the floor is for the last time yours.